In our last episode, we talked through a process about how to create a product or a service that your audience actually wants to buy from you so that you don't put a lot of time and effort into creating something, go to sell it, and then no one buys it. And so that fixes that problem. But there's another part of that, which is, okay, now you have your product or your service, but how do you actually test the offer that compels people to want to buy it, right? You can have the right product and the wrong offer, and people are still not going to buy. So in this episode, we're going to introduce you to the idea of a minimal viable offer and how to use this process to make sure that your offer aligns with your product so people actually buy. Hey everyone, welcome to Creator Business Lab. My name is Tim Schmoyer. It is so good to have you back for another episode of this, talking about selling. In fact, the next several episodes here are going to be about selling, starting with the foundational we're going to talk about today with pricing. All of this is going to be a part of a minimal viable offer that we're going to talk through. How do you create an offer for your product that when people see that offer, they're like, oh my gosh, I need to buy that product. I have worked with literally thousands of creators on content strategy on YouTube, but also a lot of creators on their business development. And one of the biggest disconnects creators have is they think that the product or the service should sell based on nothing more than the merit of the product or the service. And usually they find out, unfortunately, relatively quickly, that it doesn't work that way. You also need a compelling offer to complement the product or the service so that when people see that offer, they're compelled to actually buy. It's kind of like learning the hard way on YouTube when a creator puts a lot of time and energy into making the perfect, amazing video, puts it on YouTube with a really lame title and thumbnail, and no one clicks, right? It doesn't matter how amazing the title and thumbnail is. If the packaging, the title, the thumbnail, or in our case, talking about products and services, if the offer isn't compelling enough to make someone pull out their credit card, their debit card, and actually make a transaction with you online. I don't know how many times I heard from courses and services that I've sold over the past decade through my agency that is now been sold to VetIQ. But when I had it, I heard this over and over again. They're like, Tim, this was so awesome. You could easily charge twice as much for this. And I would say, great. Thank you. I'm glad you really like this. But if I had been charging twice as much for this, would you have bought it? And they're like, probably not. Like, exactly. Because the perception you have about the product before you make the transaction is more important than what the value of the product actually is after you experience it. I'm really glad that my customers experienced our products, experienced our services, and felt like they got a steal for the value that they actually paid for. But could I make someone on the front end before the sale feel like that was a good value exchange for charging twice as much? I don't know. Like that was the struggle. That was the tension that I felt. And at the end of the day, I would rather sell for less and way over deliver on the back end than over promise and under deliver. But this is the challenge, which is how do you accurately portray the value of your product or service to someone before they make the transaction so that when they buy, they feel good about their transaction, and they did so paying an amount that you feel good about. So let's dive into that. Minimal viable offers. Beginning to sell is something we're going to talk a lot about here. Now, when I first started Video Creators, I learned this very, very quickly, which is that you have no business if you don't have sales, right? Without sales, you have no business. So there becomes a level where learning to sell as a creator is the most foundational skill you need to develop in order to start monetizing your audience outside of advertising revenue, outside, or even sponsorships and brand deals though. Like you gotta sell and perform for those brand deals, or those brand deals eventually might dry up for you, right? So whether you're selling someone else's product, selling your video, pitching, selling yourself to a brand, or selling a product to your audience directly, learning to sell is a very important foundational skill for any creator. But when you're first starting to sell a brand new product or service, which is where we're going to start for the context of our discussion here, it's helpful to start with a minimal viable offer. What you want to do is, just like we talked about in the last episode where you're building something and then you're measuring it, testing the results of that, and then making changes, and then building that and testing and measuring and all that whole cycle. Just as we talked about last time, we're going to do that same thing, but now with the sale, now with the offer. The offer being when someone comes to that sales page on your website for your online course, for your consulting services, for your plugins, or your, whatever it is that you're selling, what is the thing that they see there that helps them understand what value am I going to get and how much is it going to cost me, and is it worth it or not? And the idea we want to dig into here is, how do you test that and iterate on it in order to make sure that that page and that offer that you're developing actually works, instead of making a product thinking that it's so awesome, people just have to buy it, and then nobody does. I told you some stories about that in my last episode. That's happened to me, unfortunately, too many times, and I've seen it as a common thing. It just happens to so many creators as well. One of the first times I actually put together a minimal viable offer was back in 2013. I had just started my agency, Video Creators, at the time, and I wanted to put together, at that time ebooks were still a thing, I wanted to write an ebook called 30 Days to a Better YouTube Channel. But I didn't want to do it and put all the time and energy that goes into writing a resource like that if no one was going to buy it. And so one principle for you to definitely consider is, before you make the product or service, can you sell it, first of all? And let's practice that skill of selling before you actually make the product. So what I did is I created a crowdfunding campaign online, and I just said, hey, this is the book, the product, the ebook I want to make, 30 Days to a Better YouTube Channel, as a workbook for you to go through with your channel to get from point A to point B with your channel. Every day for 30 days, you're going to get a teaching, something you need to know. Number 2, you're going to get some assignments, something actionable you're going to do that day on your channel to see better results. And then 3, links to further resources to really help you take that principle to the next level in your channel, if that's something you feel like you really need to dive into. And so I put together the offer, put it on that crowdfunding page, and I wanted to know, would people buy this or not? And I put a dollar amount. I'm like, I'm not going to do this unless, I think it was like $10,000 or $20,000, something like that. Dollars. I'm not going to take the time and energy into doing this unless I can sell it, and if I can make $10,000, then I know I'm on the right track. And so I did, and I quickly went above and beyond my campaign amount there, and so I wrote the book and sold it. But as time went on, I continued to learn how people were best using this product and what feedback I was getting, and I was continually going back to that landing page later, not on the crowdfunding campaign, but when I actually started selling it long term as an evergreen product on my website. I was playing with the headlines and playing with the testimonials and the order of things and the wording of things. And over time, creators start wanting different things, and they use different words to describe their problem. And so I would try to match the language on that sales page to the language that my customer was using as closely as possible in order to help them feel like, yes, this is for me. Like they understand me. I'm like, yeah, I'm working really hard to make sure I'm using the same language you're using and everything. And so the goal for that crowdfunding campaign, though, when I pre-sold it, was to find out very quickly. I wanted to learn what works and what doesn't. What gets people's attention, and what can they feel like they can safely ignore? What gets them to buy, and what doesn't? And how much are they willing to spend on this based on the value they feel like they're going to get? And so one of the most important factors when it comes to selling is your pricing and the sales copy and the offer that goes around the pricing. Those two things, they go hand in hand. So the price is just as much a part of the offer as the text and everything else around it, because the price communicates, this is what I perceive the value of this to be, right? So you look at a $10,000 car versus a $250,000 car, and you have a very different idea based on nothing more than price what the value of those cars are. You probably even picture different cars in your mind as soon as I say that, right? Because you have a perception of what those two values could be, or $1 million home versus a $250,000 home, right? So if someone put $1 million on a $250,000 on a home that you foresee is $200,000 home, then you're probably thinking, one, you're probably really curious, or you immediately discount it. If you don't immediately discount it and you're like, wow, those people are greedy, and you move on, then you're wondering, how are they justifying $1 million? And you might get into it and be like, no, they're not. And so you quickly just dismiss that person and that sale. But not only do you dismiss them, but now you think, like, that, what's wrong with that person? What are they asking for here, right? But let's say that the seller has a story about this house that, I don't know, somehow makes it worth $1 million. Maybe it was, I don't know, Elvis Presley's house or something like that, like right now, or it was a house featured in Home Alone, or the house on Full House, or a TV show or something like that. Okay, well, now that you could see, like, oh, that's why that house, although normally be worth $250, is now worth $1 million, right? Because the offer, the packaging, the story around it now changes the value and the perception of the price of whether or not it's greedy or fair. Another important thing that you need to take into consideration with this is your audience. And what do they perceive the value is? It has maybe a little less to do with what the value actually is, but what do they perceive the value, and how do you shift the way they perceive the value to be? I remember I was in, this is several years ago, at Video Creators. A fan of ours that I worked with and had a lot of great results with on YouTube put me in touch with the former president of DreamWorks and Paramount Pictures. And so they got into a call with me, and three of us are talking there. They had this whole idea for this business that they're going to be starting in the creator economy. And they had heard from our mutual contact that what we do at Video Creators is exactly what they need in order to help the creators they were going to work with actually grow and reach their full potential. And so I explained what we did and how we did it, and they thought, that's amazing, that's awesome, that's excellent. Like, what's the price? That's exactly what we're looking for. How much does this cost? And I told them it costs $15,000 per client to do that. And they just kind of looked at me with this blank look and like, 15,000? And I was like, yeah, that's 15,000. And they're like, can you do all of that for 15,000? I was like, yes, we do that for 15,000 for our other clients. And the conversation quickly ended after that, like, we will have to get back to you. And then they never did. And I found out later they were actually expecting something closer to $150,000. And so the fact that I had told them this is what we do and we guarantee our process. In fact, I told them if your creators are working with, they follow our process and do everything that we say and they don't reach their goal within 3 months, we'll continue to work with them for free until they do. Right? Just an offer that we had developed over time that we felt very confident about and had seen it. Now, you know, the fine print of that offer is if they don't do what we say, we're off the hook. And most creators either didn't do what we say or they did what we said and they got the results. So it was pretty as easy and straightforward as that. And so I didn't get the sale because they perceived my offer to be worth a lot. And when I came in at 1/10 of the price they were expecting, now my claim was no longer felt credible. It felt like I was way over pitching and they had little faith that I could deliver on that and our team could deliver on that for what we were charging. And so the credibility went out the window and the justification didn't align. We'll talk about credibility. We'll talk about justification as part of your sales process here in future episodes. So my point though is that the price is just as much a part of the sale as the offer itself. So how do you know how much to actually charge for your product or service as a part of your offer? So part of that is going to be revealed throughout this minimal viable offer testing and feedback and the cycles you're going to go through with that. Again, get a better idea in those cycles in a previous episode. So we'll spend a lot more time on this in the next few episodes as well. But I want to emphasize here is that as a rule of thumb, I would plan, if you don't have any other numbers in your head, plan on at least charging for a 50% profit margin. You know, so some industries go for a lower profit margin, like restaurants, for example, are closer to like 30% profit margin. And other industries, such as clothing, are closer to an 80% profit margin, right? And so 50% for our online business for creators, I found is usually a good starting point as a good rule of thumb. Now, profit margin is not about how greedy can you be. And it's not about like how wealthy or rich you want to get. It is about how much money do you want to make and need to make above and beyond the cost of what it costs you to deliver that product or service. You're going to need good margins in order to stay in business, in order to pay for all the non-revenue producing parts of your business, including people and your teams and things like that. It's called overhead. All this stuff that needs to happen that isn't really directly tied to revenue. So for example, maybe you have a business manager, or you have a personal assistant, or your video editor, or accountant. You have taxes and internet service you got to pay for. You got to pay for new computers and camera equipment and training new staff members. Like that's costly, bringing them up to speed. Maybe the search and interviewing for new staff, that alone, like that process doesn't produce revenue directly, right? And so there's a lot of different technical names that each of those things would go under in a profit and loss statement. But the point I'm making right now is you need to charge a healthy margin in order to stay in business and pay yourself and pay your bills and pay all the other stuff. Plus, hopefully put stuff away for savings for your kids' weddings and college funds and a new car and all that kind of stuff. But the only way to know what your profit margin needs to be is to know every single cost that goes into creating and delivering that value to your customer. Remember, we're defining a business model as the process or the rationale in which one creates, delivers, and captures value. And so the creating, the delivering value, that costs you something, but hopefully when you capture the value, you're capturing twice as much, 50% more, as what it costs you to deliver it. Let me give you an example here. So these are actual numbers from a cohort coaching program that I did at Video Creators called Video Labs. And each cohort of creators that we worked with in this group coaching program, we would limit it to about 20 creators. Each creator would pay approximately $2,000 each. So $1,997 what we charge. And so for 20 creators, that was a total of $39,940 in revenue coming in. So just shy of $40,000 would come in. Now our costs, though, to that, and this is where you need to know every single cost that goes into delivering something. Our costs for our transaction charges to Stripe, they would take their fee from that. That fee would be $1,198.20. I would pay an admin person on my team to organize everything, get everyone set up and in the groups and making sure people staying with assignments and doing support and things like that. That costs me per session for 20 creators. That cost me $2,250. I'd have other strategists, YouTube strategists on my team leading a lot of those sessions. That cost me $2,400. My personal assistant sending out the emails and working with the creators, that cost $1,350. I had a video editor who would make the promotional videos and make the announcements for the course and for the session. That cost me $500 each time. And then we'd have meetings and trainings that we would do when we actually met with the creators. That would be $8,000. And then payroll expenses on top of that and taxes and stuff, $660, coming to a grand total cost of $16,958.20 in order for me to deliver one of these group coaching cohort experiences. And so with the revenue being just shy of $40K and the cost being just shy of $17K, the profit was $22,981.80. So approximately $23,000. That puts me at a 58% profit margin, which is a healthy range of where I would want to be. Now, part of the benefit to having that extra margin built into a product like this, which is kind of half product, half service, is that the cost structure would fluctuate from video lab session to video lab session. Sometimes we'd have a creator that would require a lot of extra attention. That would drive the cost up a little bit, right? Sometimes we would give a spot or two away for free just because we really wanted to support that person. That would bring the revenue down a little bit. And then other times I would have multiple strategists involved in the session. So instead of having just one in there, sometimes they're like, oh no, I need both of you guys in here because I'm going to be gone or out or on vacation or something like that. So you need to have enough flexibility built into the margin to allow for that. If you're watching the video portion of this and not just the audio only version, if you're watching the video, you'll see something on the screen here as a sample spreadsheet. It's not exactly the one I use for this because I wanted to hide what some people are getting paid and things like that. But you get the idea. So if you're looking at this, the green cells on this spreadsheet, those are the cells that I would fluctuate, that I would change, and I would change those numbers in order to tweak what my profit margin was going to be. So for example, I'd have an administrator in here, maybe strategist 1, strategist 2, and what they would get paid. Now they were on salary, they weren't hourly, but I'm using hourly in the example I'm using here. So let's just say they were getting paid $40 an hour. And let's say for $40 an hour for each Video Labs 8-week course, I'm going to need them for 60 hours. Okay, so then that puts them down like for $2,400 for the session. But you can say like, oh, well, what if I could get them down to like 45 hours? Then what does that do at the bottom of the spreadsheet to my profit margin? Or what if I took some of this away from this person, 40 hours, and gave it more to my admin at $25 an hour? Then how does that end, right? You can put all the costs into the spreadsheet and start fiddling with the numbers to make sure that at the bottom of it, you have a healthy profit margin. And I would recommend doing this before you actually create your minimal viable offer, because you don't want to say like, I think I'll charge this, and then later find out like, woo, that's not, I can't do this. Right? Like that's hard. You don't want to be stuck in that situation and start losing money on something. And so doing the math is really, really important for ensuring that you're actually going to be profitable. Now, if you do this spreadsheet and you get to the bottom, you're like, man, no one's going to pay that amount for this. Okay, well, now you either know, it's good to know that before you put a lot into this idea, so that you don't lose a lot of money, but also it helps you know, like, I need to have a really solid offer. What's a better way of offering this or pitching this that's gonna make that number feel like this product or service is a steal? Sometimes it's as easy as including things that don't cost you much, but have a tremendously high value to your customer. Let's say you're selling a course on how to create a side gig making products with your Cricut, which is a little machine that cuts vinyl and makes stickers and things like that. So you could say, here's your course on how to do it, and that course might be perceived at like $47. But then let's say you throw in all these other things that don't cost you anything extra. You're going to throw in all these templates, and you're going to throw in all of these checklists and these cheat sheets, and you're going to throw in like all the files that they need to get started with your 25 top selling products or something like that, right? You're going to throw all that. Now the value might have a perceived level of closer to $197 because of all those freebies and bonuses that you threw in. Or maybe you do the spreadsheet and you find out an even better scenario, which is that like, oh, this is going to be like an 80% profit margin. This is awesome. Then you know like you're definitely on the right track. The point is you have to know your numbers. If you've ever watched a show it's actually an older show now called The Profit, Profit, The Profit on CNBC with Marcus Lemonis. One of the things I took from that show, I love that show. If you haven't seen it, go watch the reruns of it. It's a guy, Marcus Lemonis, who's a serial entrepreneur, business owner guy, and in this reality show, he goes into a business that's struggling. He buys an ownership stake with his own money in that business, and he says, I'm 100% in charge, and then he turns the business around by the end of the episode, and when it was about to shut down or unprofitable or couldn't move to the next level, just watching how he takes that business from struggling and about to close to being profitable and successful by the end of the business, or him just walking with a deal because they're, the owners are difficult people or something like that. It's just fascinating. And one of the things I learned from watching that show over and over and over again is he consistently says you have to know your numbers. There's not one episode that goes by without him looking at that profit and loss statement, the P&L, and him digging into the numbers and reading those numbers like a book, like a story. Hey, it looks like back here in 2000 whatever, you had an employee you hired, but it doesn't look like that employee did very well. They ended up stealing money from you. You got rid of them here. And they're like, how did you know that? He's like, I'm just figuring it out by reading the profit and loss statement. It's like that skill that he has is way above and beyond my skill to read that. But I did learn you have to know your numbers. You have to do the math. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a situation where you're making money, but you don't know like how much you're making for the amount of time you're putting into one thing versus another thing versus something else. There was a time that we were selling something at Video Creators called, I think it was called VIP labs or something like that. And the idea was at the end of video labs, people were like, this is amazing. How do we keep going? We don't want the 8 weeks to be over. We want more. And so I created a membership program that I forget what it cost, but I think it was like $300 a year or something like that, that people, we would continue to have monthly calls instead of weekly calls and things like that. And it sold well. But what I realized is at the end of the year, not one person ever renewed their subscription. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But I was actually not that unhappy about that fact, because when I started learning my numbers better, what I found is I was putting a lot of time into this VIP thing with developing these trainings and delivering them and pushing for the sale and replying to the questions in our community. I was putting a lot of time into that for a relatively small amount of money, where if I just launched and sold another Video Labs session and made another $20-some thousand, that was far more money for significantly less hours of my time than handling this membership thing. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't do the math, if I didn't know the numbers. Now, if you're listening to all this and you're the creative type person who's like, Tim, I just like making cool stuff and putting it online for people. I am not a spreadsheet person. I am not a math person. Everything you just talked about makes me want to quit and go do something else, right? If that's what it's going to take, I'm out. And I feel you, because I am that person. I hate this stuff. I like the selling part now. I didn't at first, but I do now. Because as you start to learn how to do something well, and you feel like you're doing okay at it, you start to like it more, right? Like no one really loves a school subject they hate. They love the school subject they're good at, right? And so the good news here is that you don't have to be good at it. You just need someone who is. And so in my case, everything I was talked about with that fancy spreadsheet you just saw, I didn't make that spreadsheet. I talked to my CPA and asked my CPA to essentially become my fractional CFO, my chief financial officer, basically saying like, I know you're a contractor, I know you mostly do taxes, but can you help me out with the numbers side of all of this? And thankfully she said yes. And so she came alongside and started taking all the data from our sales and conversion rates. And she didn't do all that information, manual data entry herself. What she did is she created the spreadsheets that I needed. And then I had my assistant just manually type in all the numbers from the conversion rates. Because we did this math thing for our entire sales funnel. Everything from how many people watch this video, what percentage of them click to go to this page, and then how does this page convert with traffic from the YouTube video versus the podcast versus the emails. So I start learning where do my best customers come from, right? And then of those people, what becomes a lifetime value of a customer who buys this and goes to this funnel versus that. All those processes and funnels, someone else put together. And then I had an assistant just type in all the numbers, and then I could just look at the spreadsheet and be like, oh, wow, this is true actually. We put a lot of time and money into creating YouTube videos, but we get relatively few customers from there. But I compare it to our podcast, our audience is generating a lot more revenue for us, and it's substantially less work to produce a podcast, and is potentially higher value. And so we made the decision as a YouTube growth agency to stop making YouTube videos, because and stop putting all the money that went into that, because it was a lot of time and effort and energy, and it's something that generated relatively little revenue for us in the end. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't know the numbers, right? And so I don't know if you have someone like that or not. I would highly recommend you find someone like that. I still to this day, not sponsored, I continue to use Mid-Atlantic CPAs for this, and they have been great with being both my accountant as well as my CPA, as well as my fractional CFO. And so I assume they still do that. Like you could reach out to them and ask. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can go to their website and check them out if you want. So coming back to this idea, though, of minimal viable offer, the first part we're talking about right now is the pricing. And so if there's an assignment for you to do as a result of this episode, what I'd love for you to do is put together the cost structure for at least one of your products or services that you already offer. Even if it's not directly to your audience, but the thing that you sell are brand deal packages or sponsorships or something. I want you to put together the cost cost structure of that. How much time does it take for you to do one of those, and how much is your time worth, and your editor, and the negotiation, and maybe the legal fees that go along with it, and all of that. Put all that together, and how much, boom, at the end, that's how much it costs you. How much do you charge for one of these, and what's your profit margin at? So it could be some rough back of the napkin paper math, but I would encourage you to get into the habit of using spreadsheets if at all possible. If for no other reason, you lose napkins and you lose paper, right? But if having a place where you can keep it all in line and continue to build them out to be more and more robust over time, and now different spreadsheets are linking to different spreadsheets, and you might not get to that point. I never did. My CPA did. So Kristen, if you're watching this, thank you. It's awesome. But I would encourage you to do that. Do the math. Don't just guess, because you'll be surprised how often you're wrong with the guessing. And put the taxes in there too, the transaction fees, everything, okay? I remember for me a few years ago when I was doing video creators, I had another experience with, it wasn't just the Video Labs membership thing, the VIP thing. It was another thing that maybe you've heard of called Patreon. And when I started doing Patreon, everyone was doing Patreon. It was the new big bright shiny object that all the creators were raving about it. It was like finally the savior from brand deals and sponsorships and stuff. And so I remember our Patreon was generating what for most people would be a full-time income. It was a full-time salary for most people just off Patreon alone. So it wasn't an insignificant amount of money. But because of doing the math, I found the same thing. The amount of time we're going into managing that Patreon community, it was a lot of time for relatively little money. When, by comparison, if I did a 1-hour consultation for $1,000, and I converted that, let's just say at 80%, to a $15,000 package at the end of it, and then my team took over from there and delivered the whole $15,000 with zero of my time and attention on it, that's a $16,000 an hour endeavor, right? So Patreon was like not there. And so we kept Patreon going a little bit. I tried to find ways to hand it off to other people on my team and had some success with that. I hired a guy full-time. His full-time job was just to run our membership stuff, and it had success. But then at the end of it, he decided to move on and start his own business, which is great. Fully supported that. And I was like, the juice isn't worth the squeeze over here. And so I just shut it down. But if I didn't have done the math, I might not have known to do that. So do your math, know what you're investing your time into, how much, what value do you place on your time. If you're going to give yourself an hourly or a salary rate, like put everything together and know the details of your business. This is so important so that when you create a product, you know how to shape the offer around it so that it's actually something that will make you money and make your business sustainable in the long run. So we're going to talk a lot more about pricing strategies in our next upcoming episodes here. There's a lot that goes into this. I would just want to recommend, I'm probably going to recommend this for the next several episodes, this book, $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. The subtitle is How to Make Offers So Good People Feel Stupid Saying No. And in our business at Video Creators, I listened to the audiobook first, and I'm like, oh, wow, this is so good. I had to buy the hardcover copy of this. And then I bought one because it has so many pictures and illustrations in it. And then I bought one for everyone on my team. And I said, all of you guys, we got to read this and we got to come together. We got to talk about how do we make offers so good our audience feels stupid saying no. And we ended up with this little inside line is like, how do we make our customers feel stupid? It's like we've been working on something together and it'd be like, does that make someone feel stupid? Not stupid enough. Let's keep going, right? There'll be a link to that book down in the show notes, so go check that out. And also down there, you'll find a link to my PDF guide called Product to Profit. It's completely free. Go to timschmoyer.com/product to profit. And that guide is going to walk you through step by step exactly how to take a product and make it profitable for your audience. It's a cheat sheet to everything that you're hearing about in this episode plus the upcoming episodes. If you just want it in one actionable checklist, step-by-step, literally a checklist in there, step-by-step of how do you take your product and ensure you're charging enough and make sure your offer is making people feel stupid and getting to the point where this is profitable for you and your business and it sells on autopilot for you. That's the guide for you. timschmoyer.com/product to profit. Go to the show notes and check that out as well. And I would love to hear any questions you guys have as we're going through this. I'd love to take an intermission for an episode at some point and answer your questions that are coming up as you listen to all this. So use the link down there to send me an audio voice message as well. And I'd love to highlight those audio messages here in an upcoming episode and answer them. I know I'm doing way more call to actions than I should be doing, but sometimes I break the rules and just do things because I forget the rules and just end up rambling. So anyway, all that and more down there in the show notes for you. Go check it out. And I'll see you again next time for another Creator Business Lab podcast episode. See you guys then. Bye.